Imagine spending your whole life as the forgotten son, the outsider in your own family. Nathan Cole has always been pushed aside, overshadowed by his golden boy brother, Daniel. But at Daniel's wedding, when Nathan is humiliated one final time, he doesn't just walk away, he sets everything on fire. Lies are exposed, a family is shattered, and the golden child finally falls. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories. Nathan Cole had always known his place in the family, or rather the place his family had carved out for him, on the edges, just far enough to be acknowledged when convenient, but never truly included. He had spent his childhood learning the quiet art of being tolerated rather than cherished. His younger brother Daniel had been the bright star, the golden child, the son his parents had wanted all along. Nathan, on the other hand, had been an obligation, a necessary accessory to complete the picturesque image of a perfect family, but never the centerpiece. It had started early, though Nathan hadn't fully understood it at the time. As a child, he only felt it in the little things. The way their mother would absent-mindedly run her fingers through Daniel's hair, calling him her handsome little prince, while barely glancing at Nathan. The way their father would sit Daniel on his knee, laughing at his childish jokes, while Nathan had to stand nearby, waiting for his turn that never came. The way family gatherings had always revolved around Daniel's accomplishments, no matter how minor, while Nathan's achievements were brushed aside, as expected, unworthy of mention. By the time he was 10, Nathan had already learned the unspoken rules of the Cole household. If Daniel scored a B on a test, it was a cause for celebration. Ice cream, a pat on the back, a proud smile from their father. If Nathan brought home an A, he would receive nothing more than a nod and a reminder that this was simply what was expected of him. If Daniel acted out, he was soothed, his feelings validated. If Nathan dared to show frustration, he was scolded for being difficult, for not controlling himself better. The worst part wasn't even the blatant favoritism. It was the slow, deliberate way his parents made sure he understood his role. That no matter what he did, no matter how hard he worked, he would never be enough. It took Nathan years to stop seeking their approval. By the time he reached high school, he had stopped trying altogether. He focused on what he could control, his grades, his future, his escape. And he did it well. He graduated top of his class, got into a prestigious university, and left home as soon as he could. His parents hadn't even tried to stop him. When he packed his bags, his father had simply clapped him on the back and said, "Make us proud, son," as if Nathan's departure was simply another milestone for them to take credit for. Daniel, meanwhile, had stayed behind, attending a local university, keeping up Sunday dinners with their parents, effortlessly remaining the son they adored. Nathan's visits home became infrequent, then non-existent. His calls went unanswered, except for the rare obligatory holiday greeting from his mother, always spoken with the same breezy, detached warmth, as if she barely remembered he existed, and maybe, in a way, she didn't. Years passed. Nathan built a life of his own, far from the suffocating expectations of his childhood. He had a good job, a comfortable home, and a carefully maintained distance from the people who had spent his entire life pushing him aside. And then, one night, scrolling mindlessly through social media, he saw it. Daniel's engagement photo. It was a professional shot, crisp and elegant. Daniel in a perfectly tailored suit, his fiancée Olivia beaming beside him. The caption was filled with wedding hashtags and a countdown to the big day. Nathan stared at the screen for a long moment, letting the realization settle in. They hadn't told him. His own brother was getting married, and he had found out, the same way a distant acquaintance would, through an Instagram post. No call, no message, not even a passing mention from their mother during her rare check-ins. A slow, familiar weight settled in his chest. He shouldn't have been surprised. He shouldn't have cared. And yet, something about it. About how easy it was for them to forget him. Stung in a way he hadn't expected. Days later, his mother finally called. Her voice was light, casual, as if she had only just remembered to mention it. "Oh, sweetheart, I almost forgot. Daniel's getting married. You'll come, won't you?" Nathan didn't answer right away. There was something in her tone, something off. She wasn't excitedly sharing details. She wasn't asking him to help with the preparations, as one might expect an older brother to be involved. It felt more like she was fulfilling an obligation, checking off a box. Still, he already knew the answer. If he declined, the blame would fall on him. He could already hear the disappointment in his father's voice, the exasperation in his mother's sigh, the inevitable narrative that Nathan was the distant, ungrateful one. And Daniel wouldn't say anything, he never did. He would simply let their parents fight that battle for him, let them frame Nathan as the brother who didn't care enough to show up. So Nathan said what was expected of him. "Yeah, I'll be there." But the conversation left him unsettled. It wasn't just the invitation, it was everything. The way his mother had spoken, the way she had waited until the last possible moment to tell him. A nagging feeling crept into his mind, whispering that there was more to this than just forgetfulness. A week later, the formal invitation arrived. Thick, expensive cardstock, embossed lettering, gold-trimmed edges. The details were all there. The venue, the date, the dress code. Nathan noted absently that the envelope was addressed to him alone. No +1. It wasn't unusual. He wasn't seeing anyone serious at the moment, but something about it felt deliberate. A subtle message. Curious, he decided to do a little digging. Through mutual acquaintances, he learned more details. The guest list, the seating arrangements. And that was when he noticed something odd. It wasn't in the wedding party. That in itself wasn't necessarily an insult. Not every sibling served as best man or groomsman. But when he looked closer, he saw that Daniel's groomsmen included everyone except him. Cousins, childhood friends, even some of Daniel's college buddies who Nathan barely remembered. His own brother had chosen to exclude him. Nathan sat with that realization for a long time, turning it over in his mind, letting it settle in his chest like a weight pressing down on him. The next time his mother called, he asked about it. Her response was quick, dismissive, too quick. "Oh, honey, Daniel just wanted to keep it small. You know how weddings are." Nathan didn't argue. There was no point. He had learned long ago that questioning their choices only led to the same tired conversations, the same carefully crafted excuses. But the unease didn't fade. If anything, it grew. As the wedding day approached, he told himself it didn't matter. That he was used to this, that he had spent years expecting nothing from them. And yet, deep down, a voice whispered, "This time it's different." Because this time, they weren't just forgetting about him. They were making sure he knew he didn't belong. Nathan arrived at the wedding venue just past noon, pulling his car into the private parking lot of the Rosewood Grand Hotel, an elegant estate nestled just outside the city. The place was exactly what he had expected. Lavish, pristine, and meticulously curated for the perfect wedding. Tall white pillars framed the entrance, and through the grand glass doors, he could see a massive crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling, casting golden light over the marble floors. Staff in black uniforms bustled around, ensuring everything was in place, their movements practiced and precise. It was a wedding meant to impress, and it had Daniel written all over it. Nathan stepped inside, adjusting the cuff of his suit. Dark, sharp, understated. He hadn't bothered with anything flashy, but he knew he looked good. He had learned a long time ago that blending in was his best armor. The moment he reached the front desk, a young woman behind the counter greeted him with a professional smile. "Good afternoon, sir. May I have your name?" "Nathan Cole." She scanned the list, her brows furrowing slightly. A small frown flickered across her lips before she caught herself. "Ah, yes. Here you are. You'll be in room 314 on the 3rd floor. Here's your key card." Nathan accepted the card but didn't move. His fingers tapped lightly against the counter. "Where's the rest of the wedding party staying?" The woman hesitated, then glanced at the screen. Most of them are on the 2nd floor." Nathan let out a small, humorless laugh. Of course. Deliberate. Every decision was deliberate. He thanked her and made his way upstairs, keeping his expression carefully neutral. But inside his thoughts were spinning. The 3rd floor was quieter, more isolated. As soon as he stepped into the hallway, he noticed something. The rooms down here were fewer, spaced further apart. He was being kept away. Still, he told himself it didn't matter. It was just a room. Just a weekend. He could get through it. He unlocked his door and stepped inside. The suite was nice, expensive but impersonal. Everything in its place, the decor modern and sleek. A king-size bed, a minibar, a small seating area by the window that overlooked the hotel gardens below. Nathan placed his bag down, then pulled out his phone. He had a few unread texts from work, a message from an old college friend, and nothing from his family. No, "Can't wait to see you." No, "Glad you made it." Nothing. An afterthought. That was all he had ever been. He shook his head, exhaling slowly before tossing the phone onto the bed. He wasn't here for them. He was here to prove something to himself. That he could endure this. That he could look them in the eye and walk away on his own terms. That was when he heard it. Laughter. Muffled but close. Just outside his door. Carrying down the hallway. Nathan stepped closer, listening. A group of voices. Loud. Familiar. He cracked the door open just slightly. Daniel's groomsmen. His cousins. His childhood best friend. Even a few distant relatives Nathan barely remembered. They were making their way down the hall, all dressed in matching suits, all heading toward the elevators. Not a single one of them even knocked on Nathan's door. He stood there, watching them disappear around the corner. It was funny, really. He had known what to expect. He had prepared himself for this exact treatment. And yet, seeing it play out in real time, in such small, calculated ways, still managed to sink its claws into him. They had gone out of their way to keep him out. Nathan clenched his jaw, forcing his hands to stay at his sides, forcing himself not to feel anything at all. Instead, he grabbed his suit jacket and left the room, heading downstairs toward the pre-wedding reception. The ballroom was already filling with guests, the space glowing under the golden chandeliers. Tables were set with crisp white linens, delicate floral arrangements, and tall glasses of champagne. Nathan kept to the edges, scanning the room. His parents were at the center of it all, effortlessly social, moving between guests with practiced ease. His father was engaged in conversation with another man Nathan vaguely recognized. Someone important, no doubt. His mother was laughing lightly at something another woman had said, her perfectly manicured fingers resting gently against her pearls. And then there was Daniel. Standing near the bar, one hand around his fiancée's waist, the other gesturing animatedly as he spoke to a group of guests. He was completely in his element, relaxed, charming, adored. Nathan's fingers curled into a fist before he forced them to relax. He turned toward the seating chart, scanning the elegant calligraphy. And there it was. His name, positioned near the entrance, near the coat rack, far from the family. Nathan let out a slow breath, the realization sinking in. This wasn't just thoughtlessness. This wasn't accidental. They had planned this. A voice behind him made him stiffen. "Oh, hey, you made it." Nathan turned. Daniel, standing there, drink in hand, smiling like nothing was wrong. Like this wasn't the first real conversation they had had in years. Nathan stared at him for a moment. "You didn't tell me you were getting married." Daniel's smile faltered just slightly before he recovered. "Oh, come on, man. It's been crazy. You know how it is." Nathan arched a brow. "Do I?" Daniel exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Look, it wasn't personal, all right? We've just been busy." "Right. Because it was never personal. It was never intentional. It was just how things were." Nathan glanced at the seating chart again, then back at Daniel. "So," he said slowly, "mind telling me why my seat is practically in the hallway?" Daniel let out a short laugh, but it was forced. "Oh, that? Yeah. We had to move a few things around last minute." Nathan's expression didn't change. "And I just happened to be the one who got moved outside." Daniel shrugged. "I mean, yeah, we had to prioritize close family for the main tables." Something in Nathan snapped. He didn't let it show, not yet. Instead, he gave a small, sharp smile. "Right. Close family." A new voice joined them. Now, let's not make a scene. It's Daniel's big day." Nathan turned. Their father, standing beside Daniel, his expression polite, but with just enough warning in his tone to make it clear Nathan was the problem. Nathan met his gaze, unreadable. He could walk away, ignore it, do what he always did. But not this time, because something in him had shifted. Because for the first time, he saw exactly what they thought of him. They hadn't invited him out of love. They hadn't included him because they wanted him there. They had invited him because they needed to keep up appearances, to check a box, to maintain the illusion of a perfect family. And they thought he would play along. Nathan took a slow breath. Then he smiled. "Don't worry, Dad. I won't ruin anything." He clapped Daniel on the shoulder, his grip just a little too firm. "But you might." Daniel frowned, confused. Nathan just turned and walked away. He wasn't leaving, not yet. Because now it was his turn to set the terms. Nathan didn't return to his room after the confrontation. Instead, he wandered through the hotel, hands in his pockets, his mind turning over the same thought again and again. They had gone out of their way to push him aside. It wasn't just an accident. It wasn't just thoughtlessness. It was a message. And that message was clear. You don't belong here. But instead of leaving like they expected him to, Nathan decided something. He wasn't going anywhere. If they wanted to sideline him, they would have to do better than that. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the towering windows of the hotel lobby, casting golden light on the marble floors. Guests moved in and out, some still in the glow of pre-wedding excitement, bridesmaids adjusting last-minute details, groomsmen laughing over drinks at the bar, hotel staff rushing to accommodate requests. Nathan took his time getting ready, not out of laziness but out of quiet defiance. If they thought they could make him feel small, make him feel like an afterthought, then he would make sure that every moment of his presence was intentional. He pulled on his suit, dark, tailored, sharp, and adjusted his tie in the mirror. He knew exactly what today would be. A parade of pretenses and polished lies, and he had played along with those lies for long enough. By the time he arrived at the wedding venue, the ceremony was already about to begin. Rows of pristine white chairs stretched in symmetrical rows under the open-air pavilion. White roses lined the aisle, delicate lights woven through the trees, the entire setting designed to exude effortless perfection. Nathan moved through the guests, watching. His parents, positioned at the very front, looked completely at ease, basking in the glow of social admiration. His father shook hands with powerful men. His mother exchanged pleasantries with women who spoke in hushed, approving tones. And Daniel was glowing, standing tall at the altar, dressed in an immaculately fitted suit, every inch the perfect son, the perfect groom. He had always been good at that, knowing exactly what people wanted to see, what they wanted to hear. Nathan slipped into his assigned seat, far from the family, as expected, but he didn't sit quietly. He watched, listened, studied the people around him, and that was when he started to notice something interesting. The guests, especially Olivia's family, were too polished, their smiles too tight, their laughter too controlled. He was no stranger to carefully managed social performances. And this was a performance. Nathan leaned back, considering. Daniel had spent years perfecting the act of being loved, but Nathan knew him better than anyone, and if there was one thing he knew about Daniel, it was that he could only pretend for so long. As the ceremony began, Nathan let his gaze drift to Olivia. She stood beside Daniel, her veil catching the sunlight, the picture of elegance. But there was something in her posture, a hesitation, a stiffness. Nathan wondered if she had started to see it yet, if she had started to notice the cracks in Daniel's perfect image. The ceremony passed in a blur of rehearsed vows and warm applause. By the time the guests began filtering into the reception hall, the atmosphere had shifted. Nathan moved toward the seating chart, scanning the calligraphy. His name right where he expected it, at the edge of the room. He let out a slow breath, tapping his fingers against the place card. They were still playing their game. Fine. They had made their choice. Now he would make his. Nathan turned away from the chart and instead focused on the people. The groomsmen, laughing over their drinks. Men who had been given his place. The distant relatives chatting among themselves. People who barely knew Daniel but had been given more consideration than his own brother. And of course his parents. Their laughter, their ease, the absolute certainty that they had placed Nathan exactly where they wanted him. Nathan took a slow sip of champagne, considering. He could leave, walk away, let them have their picture-perfect moment. Or he could remind them that they never should have invited him at all. And just like that, the decision was made. Nathan didn't return to his assigned seat. Instead, he moved toward a different table, the one closest to Olivia's father. Richard Montgomery was an intimidating presence, his reputation spanning decades in business and politics, a man who valued loyalty, respect, and appearances. Nathan slipped into an empty chair just as Richard finished a conversation. "Richard," he greeted smoothly. The older man turned, surprised. "Nathan?" Nathan smiled. "Surprised you remember." Richard gave a polite chuckle, sipping his drink. "I try to keep track of the important people." Nathan tilted his head slightly. "Funny. That's not how Daniel described you." A flicker of something darkened Richard's expression. Nathan leaned forward slightly. "I assume he didn't tell you about his complaints?" Richard set his glass down. "Complaints?" Nathan exhaled, as if it were nothing. "Oh, you know, the usual. How exhausting it is pretending to care about family traditions. How he's tolerating things for Olivia's sake. How he's counting down the days until he can finally stop pretending." Richard's expression hardened. Nathan smiled. Hook. He didn't need to say more. The damage was done. Richard wouldn't make a scene now, but Nathan knew that later. Later, Daniel would have a problem. A very big one. Nathan stood, straightening his suit. "Anyway, enjoy the wedding." Richard barely acknowledged him, his expression unreadable. Nathan walked away, and for the first time in his life, he felt something dangerous and exhilarating. Control. They had spent years deciding where he belonged, shaping his role in their family narrative. But today, he was writing his own. Nathan didn't return to his seat after his conversation with Richard Montgomery. He didn't need to. The moment the older man's expression darkened, the game had shifted. A single spark, and now the fire had begun to spread. He moved through the crowd, slow and deliberate, scanning the room like a predator assessing its surroundings. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the hum of polite conversation, it all seemed so carefully manufactured, a performance perfectly choreographed to maintain the illusion of harmony. But Nathan had never been part of that illusion, and tonight he was done playing along. He spotted Daniel across the room, standing at the head table, basking in the glow of admiration. Olivia stood beside him, looking beautiful, if not a little distracted. She had barely spoken during the reception, her gaze flickering toward her father every so often, as if she could sense the shift in his mood. Nathan smirked. She was smart. She'd put the pieces together soon enough. But first, it was time for the speeches. A wedding coordinator tapped a spoon against her glass, calling for attention. The chatter in the ballroom softened as the microphone was handed to Daniel. He stood adjusting his tie with an easy smile. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. This wedding has been a dream come true, and Olivia and I are so grateful to celebrate with all of you." Soft applause followed. The guests, intoxicated by the charm of it all, leaned in, eager to listen to the golden boy speak. Nathan waited. Daniel continued, weaving his carefully prepared words into something that sounded effortless, genuine. He was good at this. Always had been. Convincing the world that he was exactly the person they wanted him to be. Nathan wondered how much of it Olivia believed. When Daniel finished, the microphone was passed to Olivia's father. Richard Montgomery rose to his feet, his movements measured, his expression neutral, but Nathan saw it. The tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped against the side of his glass. Nathan had planted the seed. Now it was growing. Richard's speech was formal, polished, a well-rehearsed nod to family and tradition, but there was something missing. Warmth. His words felt distant, restrained. When he finished, Olivia's mother stood, offering a few sentimental words about her daughter's happiness, her voice gentle, filled with pride. And then, finally, it was the best man's turn. Daniel's childhood best friend, Jason, took the microphone, clearing his throat. Well, I don't think anyone here is surprised that Daniel ended up marrying someone as amazing as Olivia. He's always been the kind of guy who gets what he wants. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Nathan raised a brow. Jason continued, launching into a string of carefully curated anecdotes, stories meant to paint Daniel as the perfect brother, the loyal friend, the charming man everyone admired. Nathan nearly scoffed. It was like watching someone eulogize a version of Daniel that had never actually existed. And then Jason made a mistake. He grinned, turning toward Daniel. Man, remember your bachelor party? I think that was the first time I ever heard you say you were actually nervous about something. Daniel's smile tightened. Jason laughed, oblivious. Seriously, though, we all know you're great at keeping up appearances, but you should have seen him, guys. He was freaking out. Like, full-on, what if I'm making a mistake kind of freak out. The room shifted. Subtle but undeniable. A few guests chuckled, brushing it off as harmless teasing. But Olivia, she wasn't laughing. Nathan watched as her back straightened, as her fingers clenched around the stem of her champagne glass. Jason, sensing the sudden discomfort, quickly waved a hand. Relax, man, I'm just messing with you. He chuckled awkwardly. I mean, obviously. You're happy now, right? Silence. Daniel forced a laugh, but it was stiff. Yeah, obviously. Nathan smirked. The first crack had appeared, but it wasn't enough. He leaned forward slightly, setting his glass down. You know, he said, loud enough to be heard but casual enough to seem off-handed, I was actually surprised I wasn't invited to the bachelor party. A few heads turned. Jason blinked, caught off guard. Oh, yeah, man, it was kind of a last-minute thing. Nathan tilted his head. That's funny, because I seem to remember you guys talking about it for weeks. Jason laughed awkwardly. Well, you know how it is. Daniel cut in quickly, his tone light but with an underlying sharpness. It wasn't personal, Nathan. We just wanted to keep it small. Nathan let the words settle before offering a slow nod. Right, like the wedding party, like the seating chart. He picked up his drink again, taking a small sip. Like everything else. More silence. Daniel's jaw tightened. Nathan, Richard Montgomery cleared his throat. The weight of his presence alone was enough to shift the energy in the room. Nathan, he said, his voice even but pointed. Would you care to elaborate? Nathan smiled, setting his glass down. He took his time, scanning the faces in the room, letting the anticipation build. And then he met Richard's gaze. I just think it's interesting, he said smoothly, how selective Daniel is about the people he keeps close, and how different that list is when no one's watching. Daniel's eyes flashed with warning. But Nathan wasn't stopping now. He turned toward Olivia, his expression almost sympathetic. Did he ever tell you what he really thought about all of this? About your father? He gestured vaguely. About the whole family legacy thing? Olivia stiffened. Richard's expression darkened. What exactly are you suggesting? Nathan exhaled, shaking his head slightly. I just think it's funny how people present themselves one way in public and another in private. Like, for example, how Daniel spent his entire bachelor party complaining about how exhausting it is pretending to be the perfect son-in-law. The room froze. Olivia turned sharply to Daniel. Daniel's smile vanished. "Nathan, stop." Nathan leaned back, crossing his arms. "I mean, it makes sense. He never really respected tradition, said he was just playing along for Olivia's sake, that he'd ditch all the formalities once the wedding was over." Olivia's mother covered her mouth, her face paling. Daniel's hands curled into fists. "You're twisting my words." Nathan shrugged. "Am I?" Richard Montgomery set his glass down with deliberate finality. The sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. He turned to Daniel, his expression unreadable. "Is this true?" Daniel shook his head quickly. "Of course not. Nathan's just trying to stir up drama." Nathan let out a small laugh. "Oh, come on, Danny. You were a lot more honest after a few drinks." Daniel's face was turning red. His hands were shaking. The guests were whispering now, eyes darting between him and Richard. And then Olivia, silent until now, spoke. "Daniel," she said slowly, "tell me the truth." Her voice was quiet, but there was no room for lies. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, and just like that, everything crumbled. Richard Montgomery pushed his chair back. Olivia took a step away. The guests were no longer whispering. They were staring. Nathan smiled. They had spent years pretending he didn't exist. But tonight, they were finally seeing him. The silence in the reception hall was suffocating, thick with the weight of exposed lies and shattered illusions. Nathan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, as he watched Daniel struggle to salvage what was left of his carefully constructed image. Olivia's hands had fallen away from Daniel's arm. She wasn't touching him anymore. That, more than anything, told Nathan that she was starting to see it, starting to realize that the man standing beside her wasn't the man she thought she was marrying. Richard Montgomery remained seated, but the air around him was charged with barely restrained anger. He hadn't built his empire by letting people walk over him, and Nathan knew exactly what Daniel had done tonight. Insulted the one man he couldn't afford to disrespect. Daniel swallowed hard, glancing around the room, his mind working at rapid speed to find an escape route. But there wasn't one. Not this time. "Olivia, babe, you know this isn't true," he said, his voice lighter, casual, too casual. He's always been bitter about the way things were growing up. He's trying to ruin this night for us." Nathan exhaled a soft laugh, shaking his head. "Of course. Blame him. Make him the problem. The same move their parents had always pulled. Daniel was innocent. Nathan was difficult." Richard leaned forward slightly, his piercing gaze locked onto Daniel. "So, you're saying you never said those things?" Daniel hesitated. A fraction of a second, a beat too long. And in that moment, Nathan saw everything click into place for Olivia. She turned to Daniel, her expression unreadable. "Tell me you never said it." Daniel laughed, forced and thin. "Come on, Liv, you really think I'd—" "Tell me you never said it." The guests were dead silent now, watching, waiting. Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Look, maybe I said some things when I was drunk, but—" Nathan smirked. "There it is, the first admission. The first tiny crack that would send the entire foundation crumbling." "Maybe," Olivia repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. Daniel shifted his weight. It was nothing, just stupid bachelor party talk. Every guy complains when he's stressed about the wedding. It doesn't mean anything. Richard set his glass down with a loud clink. "I see." His voice was calm, but it had an edge, sharp enough to cut through steel. Daniel turned to him quickly. "Richard, sir." But Richard wasn't looking at him anymore. He had already risen from his chair, straightening his jacket with a quiet, deliberate movement. "I don't do business with men who lie to my face," Richard said smoothly, "and I certainly don't welcome them into my family." A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. Olivia's mother gasped softly, but Olivia? She didn't look surprised at all. If anything, she looked disgusted. Daniel's face drained of color. "Sir, wait." Richard ignored him. Instead, he turned to Olivia and extended a hand. "Come, we have nothing left to discuss here." Daniel's panic was instant. "Olivia," he said quickly, reaching for her arm, "you don't have to go with him. We can talk about this." She stepped back, her voice cold. "You already said everything that mattered." The weight of her words was final. Nathan watched as Daniel's world crumbled around him. The guests were no longer trying to hide their whispers. Some were openly watching, others murmuring in quiet disbelief. Daniel turned to their parents, desperate now. But for the first time, their father had no words. His expression was a mixture of shock and sheer, undeniable humiliation. He had spent years building Daniel up, shaping him into the perfect son, the perfect success story, and now, in the span of minutes, Nathan had destroyed all of it. And it was beautiful. Daniel's gaze snapped to Nathan, his eyes blazing. "You?" he seethed. Nathan just smiled, tilting his head. "Me?" Daniel took a step toward him, his fists clenched. "You did this." Nathan arched a brow. "Did I?" He took a slow sip of his drink. "Because last I checked, all I did was tell the truth." Daniel was shaking now, his carefully composed mask slipping completely. "You ruined my wedding." Nathan leaned forward, his voice smooth. "No, Daniel, you ruined your own wedding. I just made sure everyone saw it." Daniel's hands curled into fists, his entire body coiled with rage. For a moment, Nathan thought he might actually take a swing at him. He almost hoped he would. But before Daniel could make a bigger fool of himself, their mother finally stepped forward. "Enough," she hissed, her voice trembling. She grabbed Daniel's arm, squeezing tight, a silent plea. "Don't make this worse." But it was already too late. Richard Montgomery had already left, Olivia and her mother right behind him. The guests were scattered, whispering, exchanging glances. The wedding was over. Nathan sighed, stretching slightly. "Well," he said, "this was fun." Daniel let out a harsh, furious breath. "Get out." Nathan smiled. "Oh, don't worry. I was already planning on it." He turned, making his way toward the exit, passing by the gift table. And then he saw it. His own gift. The one he had carefully chosen for Daniel. The one he had debated bringing at all. He picked it up. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Are you seriously taking back your gift?" Nathan smirked. "Why would I leave it? Apparently I'm not family, right?" Daniel made a choked noise of rage, but Nathan wasn't listening anymore. He turned, heading for the exit, his pace slow, unhurried. He could feel the weight of 100 eyes on his back. And he didn't care. As he stepped outside, the night air was crisp and cool against his skin. The low hum of distant conversations still carried from the reception hall, but he didn't need to turn back to know what he had left behind. He had cracked the illusion. Daniel? Daniel was going to spend the rest of his life picking up the pieces. Nathan didn't look back as he walked out of the reception hall. he didn't need to. The wreckage was behind him, smoldering and irreparable. The night air was crisp, carrying the distant murmur of voices and the faint hum of music still playing inside, a pathetic attempt to salvage what was already lost. He reached his car, tossing the wedding gift onto the passenger seat with a casual flick of his wrist. The absurdity of it all wasn't lost on him. He had arrived at this wedding prepared to be an afterthought. He was meant to be nothing more than a ghost in the background, a tolerated presence at the edges of a perfect evening. And yet, here he was, the catalyst, the wrecking ball that had brought it all down. His phone buzzed against the console. He sighed, rubbing his fingers against his temple before glancing at the screen. 5 missed calls. His father, his mother, his brother, his mother again, his father again. Then the texts. His father. What the hell were you thinking? His mother. Nathan, please, call me. Daniel, you ruined everything. Daniel, I can't believe you would do this to me. Daniel. Andy. My God. You're dead to me. Nathan let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. Dead to him? That was funny, really. Daniel had spent years pretending Nathan didn't exist. Now that the tables had turned, he couldn't stand being the one ignored. His phone buzzed again, a voicemail from his mother. He stared at it for a moment, debating whether to listen. With a slow sigh, he hit play. Her voice came through, soft and tired. Nathan, I don't know what to say. A pause, a slow inhale. Your father is furious. Daniel, she hesitated. Daniel is, well, he's not handling this well. Nathan smirked. Of course he wasn't. Another pause, then, softer, Richard isn't speaking to him. Nathan's fingers drummed against the steering wheel. Elle left the reception early, she continued, her voice hesitant. I think the business deal is off. Nathan exhaled slowly. So that was it. That was the real loss. It wasn't just about Olivia walking out. It wasn't just about the humiliation. Daniel had lost something far more important in their father's eyes. His worth. Their father had never truly cared about love, about marriage, about family. What he cared about was legacy, reputation. And Daniel had thrown all of that away in one night. I don't know if Olivia is staying, his mother added, voice thinner now. She left with her parents. No one has heard from her since. Nathan said nothing. Another pause, then, Daniel thinks you should apologize. Nathan barked out a short laugh. Apologize? You know how he is, she said quickly, as if anticipating his reaction. He's convinced that if you take the blame, maybe Richard will reconsider. Nathan shook his head, tapping his fingers against the phone. Unbelievable. Even now, Daniel was still trying to shift the fallout onto him. Nathan had simply told the truth. It wasn't his fault that Daniel had built his life on lies. There was a long silence in the voicemail, and then, softly, so softly he almost missed it, his mother whispered, I don't think you should. Nathan sat up slightly. She sighed. I told him that. Your father is trying to fix things, but Richard is done. Nathan leaned back against the headrest, letting the weight of it all sink in. For once, his mother wasn't asking him to shrink himself down to make Daniel feel bigger. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an admission of guilt. But it was something. The voicemail ended. Nathan stared at his phone for a long moment before setting it aside. Outside, the hotel lights cast a warm golden glow across the pavement. The night felt still, quiet. For the first time in years, he felt weightless. He had spent a lifetime being careful, holding back, swallowing his frustration in favor of keeping the peace. But peace had never been real. It had been a slow suffocation, a quiet erasure of everything he was supposed to be. He was done with that now. Nathan started the car. As he pulled out of the parking lot, his phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't his family. A text from Olivia. He frowned, glancing at the screen. Olivia, just so you know, I left. Nathan exhaled slowly, rolling his jaw. Olivia, staying with my parents for now, thinking things over. Nathan tapped his thumb against the steering wheel. She hadn't said much, but she had said enough. She had seen it finally, seen Daniel for who he really was. Nathan thought about replying, but instead he let the message sit there. Some things didn't need a response. Some things simply needed time. He drove home in silence. The city lights blurred past his window, a quiet hum of movement beyond his thoughts. By the time he pulled into his driveway, his phone had vibrated so many times that it had nearly slid off the console. He ignored it. For the first time in his life, he wasn't waiting for their approval. For the first time in his life, he didn't need them anymore. Nathan sat in his driveway for a long time, the soft glow of his dashboard casting pale light across his hands. His phone was still buzzing, the desperate attempts of his family trying to salvage the wreckage of the night he had left behind. He made no move to answer. He didn't need to. For the first time, he had nothing left to say. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his jaw before finally stepping out of the car. The night air was crisp, the silence of the neighborhood a stark contrast to the chaos he had walked away from. The tension that had sat heavy in his chest for years, decades really, had finally lifted. He had spent his entire life carrying the weight of their rejection, their indifference, their carefully concealed disdain. But now he had dropped it, left it behind, right there in the middle of that perfect reception hall. He walked into his house, locking the door behind him, savoring the quiet. For once, no one was waiting for him to perform. No family to impress, no father to appease, no brother to tolerate, just himself. He poured himself a drink, letting the ice clink against the glass, the whiskey smooth and sharp against his throat. His phone buzzed again, vibrating against the counter where he had tossed it. Nathan ignored it. Instead, he walked to the living room, sinking into the couch, staring up at the ceiling. It was over. The battle he hadn't even known he had been fighting for years. It was done, and he had won. His phone vibrated again. This time it was a text from his mother. "Mom, your father is still trying to fix things with Richard, but I don't think it's working." Nathan let out a breath through his nose. Of course, it wasn't. His father was a powerful man, but even power had its limits. And Richard Montgomery? He wasn't the kind of man who forgave being played for a fool. Nathan smirked to himself, shaking his head. Daniel must be spiraling. He could picture it so clearly. His father pacing, his mother trying to smooth things over, Daniel desperate to claw back whatever control he had lost. But there was no fixing this, because the truth had been spoken. Out loud, in front of everyone. Nathan set his glass down, rolling his shoulders, letting the weight of his family's problems fall away from him like water off his skin. It wasn't his burden anymore. A few minutes passed before his phone buzzed again. Another message from his mother. "Mom, Daniel still thinks this is your fault." Nathan snorted. Of course he did. "Mom, he says if you just apologize, maybe things could go back to normal." Nathan let out a soft, humorless laugh. Normal had never existed. Normal was Daniel getting everything. Normal was Nathan fading into the background. Normal was his parents excusing everything Daniel did, no matter how cruel or careless. And they thought he would want to go back to that? Nathan picked up his phone, typing back. "Nathan, tell him not to hold his breath." He set the phone down, standing, stretching. He wasn't going to spend another second of his life cleaning up Daniel's messes. Another buzz, but this time it wasn't from his mother. Nathan frowned, picking up the phone. "Olivia." He opened the message. "Olivia, I thought I knew who I was marrying." Nathan leaned against the counter, staring at the words for a moment. Then another message popped up. "Olivia, thank you." Nathan exhaled, shaking his head. She had finally seen it. The real Daniel. The man behind the mask. And now she was walking away from it. Nathan typed back, simple and easy. "Nathan, take your time." He doubted she'd respond. She didn't need to. Some things weren't meant to be fixed overnight. Some things weren't meant to be fixed at all. He set the phone down for the last time that night, picking up his drink, taking a slow sip. Then, for the first time in his life, he let it all go. Nathan woke up the next morning to the sound of his phone vibrating against the nightstand. The sun was barely rising, soft golden light creeping through the blinds, painting thin lines across his ceiling. For a long moment he just lay there, staring at it. It was strange, waking up without the familiar weight pressing down on his chest, the weight he had carried for so many years without even realizing it. The phone buzzed again. He sighed, reaching for it. 7 missed calls. His father, his mother, his father again. "Daniel, Daniel, Daniel, Daniel." Nathan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. He should have known Daniel wouldn't let it go. The texts were worse. "Dad, Nathan, call me back, now." "Mom, Nathan, please, just talk to him." "Daniel, you have no idea what you've done." "Daniel, fix this." "Daniel, say it was a joke. Tell them you made it up." Nathan scoffed, rubbing his temple. Daniel was panicking. Good. His thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before he closed out of the messages altogether. He didn't need to read any more. He already knew how the story went. Daniel had spent his entire life manipulating people, twisting narratives, convincing their parents to believe his version of events, no matter how twisted it was. And now, for the first time, no one was on his side. Nathan had seen it on his father's face, the disappointment, the humiliation. Daniel had spent his whole life being the perfect son, the one who could do no wrong. But now, that image was shattered, and he didn't know how to exist without it. Nathan got up, stretching, rolling his shoulders as he made his way to the kitchen. He made himself coffee, the quiet hum of the machine filling the silence of his house. Outside, the world was already moving on. Birds chirping, cars starting up in driveways, a neighbor jogging past with their dog. The world didn't stop for Daniel. And neither would Nathan. He sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee, watching the steam curl into the air. His phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't Daniel. It was his mother. He hesitated, then swiped to answer. "Nathan," she sighed, her voice tired. "He didn't say anything." She exhaled. Your father is furious." Nathan took another sip of coffee. "Yeah. I figured. He thinks you should apologize." Nathan let out a quiet laugh. "Not happening." Her silence stretched between them. Then, softly, "I don't think you should either." That made him pause. He sat up slightly, frowning. "What?" She sighed again. "I saw what happened, Nathan. I saw how they treated you. I saw how Daniel treated you." A pause. "And I saw how he reacted when you finally told the truth." Nathan stayed quiet. "I don't know if that means anything to you," she continued, "but I wanted to say it. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was the closest thing she had ever given him." Nathan exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "It means something," he admitted. She hesitated. "Are you okay?" He smiled a little, glancing out the window. The sun was higher now, casting a warm glow over the quiet street. "I actually am." Another pause. Then, finally, "Good." It wasn't much. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was honest. And for once, it was enough. They said their goodbyes, and Nathan hung up. He set his phone down, leaning back in his chair. For the first time in years, he wasn't waiting. Not waiting for their approval. Not waiting for them to change. Not waiting to be chosen. He had spent his entire life on the outside of his own family, wondering what he could do to earn a place at the table. And now, finally, he didn't care anymore. His phone buzzed one last time. A text from Olivia. "Olivia, I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I'm not going back." Nathan stared at the message for a moment. Then, slowly, a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Nathan, take your time." She didn't reply right away. She didn't need to. Some things took time to fully fall apart. Some truths once spoken couldn't be undone. And sometimes, just sometimes, breaking things was the only way to finally be free. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. It means a lot to have you here, listening, thinking, and maybe even seeing parts of yourself in Nathan's journey. This story isn't just about family betrayal or long-buried resentment. It's about recognizing your worth, even when others refuse to see it. It's about understanding that some relationships, no matter how deep the history, are built on conditions that were never fair to begin with. And most importantly, it's about realizing that you don't need to wait for permission to walk away from people who refuse to respect you. Nathan spent years shrinking himself, playing along, hoping for love that was never freely given. But in the end, he found something even more valuable than their approval: freedom. And sometimes, letting go is the most powerful thing you can do. Where are you watching this from? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing from all of you. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. There's so much more to come. See you in the next one.